To the class.
Not acceptable.
Who was that?
It's, yeah. Nobody's on yet, you know, my father-in-law, when he talks about his Garmin or his woman that, you know, tells him where to turn and all of that. My father-in-law from Iowa likes to call her the bitch in the box.
Jeez.
This webinar is being recorded. Leave meeting or continue.
Just
Why
click
not?
yes.
Yes.
Doesn't offer that.
Agree.
I mean, like, stay, don't leave.
I'm here.
Nice try, Matt. Nice try.
You-
All right. Tech support get you plugged in, Matt?
What's that?
I said the tech support take care of you, you're plugged in?
Nope, but we're still at like 60-some%.
Okay. Just
Mm.
don't
Drop
let tech
it.
support go too far.
Did you hear that, Tech? Yeah, I'll be right back. I have to grab some wine.
Oh, yeah,
What?
you might
The
want to do
bottle's
that.
already done.
Yeah.
All right, it looks like Isaac has joined us. Looks, who else is there? Is that Scott? Oh, it must be, okay. Joining us, thank you, guys. Catherine coming on, cool. Excellent. Isaac, I follow you on Instagram. I love your adventures that you're doing all over the East Coast there, especially that last post with the snakes. That was pretty cool.
Thanks.
I'm back. All right.
Missed.
I saw a tear in your eye.
I get lonely on Zoom calls when someone leaves. Oh.
A little separation anxiety. All right,
Well,
cool.
Whoa. All right.
Makers, did you turn on the chat? You know, go down to the bottom, click the little chat button. You can
There's
click
a chat button.
what
as
happens if I
well,
click it?
and then you can see the chat, and you can see who's on with us as well by looking at attendees. So
Right over your face right now.
mine, you don't need to see my face. Cool. We got Robin joining us. Joyce, excellent. Look at that. Look at all you people being on time today. Thank you.
How's the vineyard looking?
All right. Cool. It looks like everybody who has RSVP'd, excuse me, I'm going to move that just a little bit, is here. So thank you everyone for joining us and being so timely. We really appreciate that. I am Chris Toronto with the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance. I'm our communications director here. And you are joining us for a virtual visit. We call it the Limelight of Paso Robles. And we call it that because we are talking about calcareous soil today. That is one of those things that is really unique to our region. It helps actually define our region as well as some brands that you're about to meet, along with the diurnal temperature swing and kind of our location on the coast. There's lots of other factors. However, when you look at one of the things that really makes Paso unique, it's all of that white chalky rock stuff that exists all over our region, whether it's kind of on the substrate over in the western hills of Paso, where it's been uplifted, or whether it's as you go east of the Salinas River, and you find it a little bit more decomposed and a little bit more granular. It's just about everywhere here. And so we are highlighting that today. Got 3 brands that I'd like to say hello to real quick, introduce them, and then we're going to get into the presentation. What I'd like to ask you though is that if you have questions, you are welcome to put them into the chat, or you can wait until the end. We can work on that, but the Q&A is really supposed to be kind of at the end. We're going to go through the presentations first. They're not really formal presentations, don't worry. It's not like we're all PowerPointy and all of that kind of stuff. We're pretty casual. The other thing is, please taste those wines as we go. We're not going to do it as a formal, like, now we're tasting this wine and now we're tasting this wine. We will get to the wines, and each individual winemaker will talk about their wines. But first, we're going to share a little bit of story and a little bit more about what makes this region unique from that soil standpoint. So first off, Carl Bowker with Caliza Winery. Say hello, Carl.
Hello, everybody.
We've got Matt Trevison with Linne Calodo.
Hello, cheers.
And Jason Joyce with Calcareous Vineyard.
Hello, yes, present.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to jump right in. The big thing is that all three of these brands all lend their name, or their name anyway is lent from this calcareous type soil that we have. What makes the calcareous? Well, what makes calcareous soil important and unique and different and just simply a staple of what we are as Paso is what we're talking about. And what I want to ask these guys first off is, why the name and why the soil type? I mean, which came first in a sense? Carl, you've kind of traveled around the world. You've seen a lot of different regions and then got into the wine industry, naming your brand Caliza. I mean, what brought you to Paso? Why Caliza? Which came first, chicken or the egg, I guess you could say?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and welcome everybody. I look forward to visiting with you. Maybe a question and answer at the end, but to the question, Chris, we moved. My wife Pam and I moved to Paso Robles to grow wine grapes. We specifically chose Paso Robles. We specifically chose this region. Well, we chose this region for a number of reasons, but mostly we were in love with the Rhone varieties, and we wanted to find a place to grow Rhone varieties in California. We lived in the San Francisco area at the time, and great things were happening here in Paso Robles with the Rhone varieties. Brands like Linne Calodo and Calcareous had just started up. Great things were happening. We wanted to be a part of that scene, that culture. And there was this great promise for Rhone varieties in Paso Robles. And having traveled a bit and visited many Rhone wine regions around the world, we love Rhone varieties. We discovered those limestone-based soils of the Southern Rhone Valley, and we were looking for some place that had soils similar to that. And Paso Robles was the place. And on top of that, it was only a 3-hour drive from where we lived and where we kept our day jobs for a few years before we actually moved here full time to start making wine. So it was a combination of a number of things, but we love the soils. I chose to be the farmer and the winemaker. And so it's really important that we were going to be growing our own grapes, making wine from those grapes that we were producing, that we found soils that were exceptional, or at least we thought at the time were exceptional. I hope they've proven to be. And we wanted to get a name for our brand that sort of represented the dirt, the land, the place from which the fruit was coming from. And since we have high levels of limestone, shale, and the like in our soils, we found the name Caliza, Spanish for limestone, and thought that was a beautiful name to name the brand.
Yeah. And now when it came down to finding, did you look at other regions? I mean, you were living down in Southern California and you were looking to get into wine. I mean, did you venture into, say, Santa Barbara or Temecula or wherever?
Yeah, actually living in the San Francisco Bay area.
Oh, sorry, San Francisco. Yeah.
South of San Francisco. So of course we looked north, we looked Mendocino County, we looked Sonoma County, we looked Napa County. We couldn't afford Napa County, so that was out. Looked at Santa Barbara, looked up and down the coast. We actually looked in Oregon and Washington State as well. And for some of those reasons I already mentioned, Paso was just a perfect opportunity. It was driving distance from where we were keeping our day jobs for a couple of years to support this venture, and also had these beautiful limestone soils and nice people like Matt were doing great things with wine. And we were like, yeah, we want to follow that. So it was a combination of a lot of things. Fortunately, having gone to school and learned about hillside farming and learning about the soils of the great vineyards of the world, knowing that many of them are limestone based or calcium based soils, it was a no-brainer when we found the site we now grow our grapes in.
Yeah. the Paso Robles area has 30 different parent soil series, and the greater majority of them, of course, are this calcareous type of stuff. One specific soil is Linne Calodo, which Matt, of course, has adopted the name in. And Matt, talk a little bit about your discovery of Paso and what kind of brought you to the region, and how you adopted not only the name, but why.
Yeah, so the first time I ever came to Paso was when I was at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, just about 30 miles to the south. And I came up and picked vineyards at James Berry Vineyard on Willow Creek Road on the west side. And that was my first time in Paso and seeing the region. For Linne Calodo, when I started this brand in 1998, what we were looking for was to make wines that were regionally specific. They weren't going to be varietally based wines; they're going to be blends. And part of that story goes with the geography of where you're located and the soil that happens to be one of the soil series within our AVA here of Paso Robles and the Willow Creek AVA is the Linne Calodo soil series. And back probably in the 70s, might have been 80s, the U.S. Geological Service, they came through and did a soil survey, and soil number 153 on their maps popped up on a couple vineyard blocks that we were making wine from. And the cool thing about these vineyard blocks was the cool rocks that were there, the whale bones that were found in these blocks, but also the natural acidity that the wines possessed in the blocks and the ability to dry farm in these blocks. So no irrigation on a lot of blocks, able to absorb the water during the rainy season, and then the plants can use that water in the following dry season. And it's not the only soil I grow on whatsoever, but it makes up for complexities and gives a location within California for our wines.
I'd love to really quick jump in, and you mentioned something about moisture, and it retains the moisture and everything. And hopefully I'm not stealing Jason's thunder too much on this, because I know you've got a thing too, and I want to encourage you to do it as well. But everybody should have received one of these as well. It's a jar of soil from Carl, which it's emblematic, I suppose you could say, of so many different vineyards all around Paso, but mostly over in the Adelaida and Willow Creek districts, where all three of these brands are located. And then you also received a little baggie. I know you were probably disappointed at the color, but kidding. Just a joke, everyone. It's California, right? But anyway, you received a little baggie, one a larger rock and one a smaller rock. And if you have the ability to do this and you have a glass of water sitting next to you, or maybe later if you want to do this, it's a fun party trick. You can make what's called Paso Robles sparkling water. Take that smaller rock, stick it in the glass. Yeah, it kind of floats. No way.
Oh, look at that.
But check out those bubbles, and then I don't know if you can hear it. I don't know where the microphone is on my computer, but I'm going to be quiet for a second.
I can hear it.
So it's soaking up water. And that's what Matt was talking about, is a lot of this calcareous material is very porous. It's really loud too, but it's really porous. And so in the middle of the heat of summer, a lot of these grapevines that are maybe not being irrigated or dry farmed, or the deficit irrigation, there's all kinds of different variants of how they find their moisture. But this is one of the main ways that vines can find moisture, is after a really good rainy year. Well, cross your fingers, a good rainy year. Unfortunately, we are walking into a drought year. That those vines can actually find moisture deep down in the soil from this material that exists here. And it is ancient seabed. So, we're talking, some of these soils are 70 to 90 million years old. And it's all basically this sedimentary rock. So as these animals, would have died, and all of that calcium rich type of material from bones and the like all lay on each other, and over time, pressure, heat, all that good stuff, it creates these soils that we have here. So let's jump to Jason next. Jason,
Yes.
at Calcareous Vineyard, your brand takes the name directly and it says we're Calcareous Vineyard. And you guys were talking offline earlier actually about how it got its name. And I'm curious now, what was the end result and why?
Well, I was just kidding because Matt was around when our founder, Lloyd Messer, who came out here from Iowa, and he had a good friend named John Munch, who is still here in Paso, but he was at the time was the winemaker at Adelaida, and they became like best buds. And John, we're a stone's throw from the Adelaida vineyards here at Calcareous. John kind of knew about this undeveloped property here, and convinced Lloyd that it was, if you want to start your own winery, Lloyd was a wine distributor in Iowa. He said, we have this incredible place. It's got this incredible soil. And Lloyd came out and kind of named it after the soil, Calcareous. And that's just the brief history. So I was checking with Max. I wasn't sure who actually came up with that name, because
Showed up with it. He showed up with it the day I met him.
nice. Because as this Zoom call attests, it's been a little bit of a marketing genius, because Calcareous has become quite a buzzword and very synonymous with Paso Robles. And there's a little bit of I feel a little pressure with that, because it's quite a claim to be Captain Calcareous. So I moved here from San Francisco. I was a pharmaceutical chemist, and winemaking was not my plan. I was in between. I was at a small pharmaceutical startup, and I had finally gotten hired by Amgen. And my career was like set. I was going to be a little more corporate, and I came down here for 3 months just to get away from the city and get away from chemistry and work a harvest, and ended up staying. And with the chemistry background, and then I have an issue with there's a lot of marketing in wine, and if I was going to work at a place that's called Calcareous, I wanted to make sure it wasn't just a marketing claim, or there's some white rocks out there. It's just some shale, and the claim that's Calcareous. So I'm going to reenact for you what I did as a chemistry guy. See if I can adjust my camera. So this is just from like this morning. So this is some soil I grabbed just under our Melback block, which is about 30 yards that way. And this is just topsoil. Like there's literally just weeds on top of this. I didn't dig down, didn't do anything special to try and find this. This is just what we grow on. And when you take that, and you take calcium carbonate and you add water and you add acid, there you get it.
Yeah.
Nice. You drink that for breakfast.
And so that's when I knew we actually had calcareous soil. It's like, all right, this is chock full of calcium carbonate, and it's right at the surface, which, calcium carbonate is dissolved in water. So there's not in the world a lot of intensely calcareous soils like this right at the surface, because over time, weathering makes it go away. And so it's kind of a freakish thing here, thanks to the San Andreas Fault and the amount of turnover of the soil they have around here, that we have this limestone right at the surface here. And I have a firm belief that it is really, really one of the keys to making wine here in Paso Robles, and what makes our wines unique and special. And I can talk longer about I feel like Matt and Carl have a lot more knowledge as far as like the actual the farming side and growing grapes, as far as the unique challenges of calcareous soils, because I feel there's two different challenges. There's the physical act of actually making a plant grow in pH 9 and over soils, it takes some special skills and some special ideas. And then the idea of like how to make wine out of the juice. Because as Matt was saying, when he's first finding these blocks, the 153 Linne Calodo blocks, they had acid in them. And to me, acid is really, really the key. And it's my winemaking adventure has been kind of based on following acid and how that comes across in our wines.
Yeah, that's great. And a good segue, Jason, because I do want to talk a little bit about the challenges in farming in this kind of soil, because it's not all just, you know, peaches and roses and unicorns. It's pretty challenging. Carl, you were actually just talking about the fact that you're planting a new vineyard, but in the process of planting your vineyards and now cultivating them, talk a little bit about some of those challenges and how you overcome them.
Yeah, we're actually just adding 5 more acres to our existing vineyard right now. So, you know, we're in the same soils that we've already been in, just a different hill over basically. And it's interesting that, you know, Matt talked about soil series within our little, it's a 60-acre parcel, but we have like 28 acres of it planted. But within our 60-acre parcel, we actually have 3 USGS soil types. So they, you know, they run in like little veins through the property. And so different sections of the property are much different. Soil types are more calcareous leaning, and some are more of the salacious nature leaning, the rocky pieces. So it's really important when developing and planting a vineyard. I mean, we dig down and see what we got, and then determine the rootstock that'll grow appropriately there, and the different irrigation methods if you're going to use irrigation. That kind of thing. Those are all super important. And then it all depends on just how, I mean, there are literally portions that very difficult to dig through when digging to plant the vines or digging to put an irrigation line, if you choose to do that. I don't know, everybody in Paso Robles run into rocks the size of Volkswagens that you just can't move through. And so lots of different fun things like that. We've even had challenges where, when it comes time to put a stake, you know, we survey the vineyard and we want to lay out the rows in a straight row. You get to certain spots, sometimes you can't even drive a stake in the ground. That the soils are either that hard from the compaction or that hard because there's something large there that you got to deal with. So lots of different challenges in these salacious, shale, and calcareous, chalky calcareous soils. Even the chalky calcareous soils can be super hard and hard to get through. Once you do, they blow up into little powdery bunches, but oftentimes over time they just get compacted and kind of like a cement layer. Really, really difficult at times. So lots of challenges. It's not like just a fertile field growing in these limestone soils there. And we like that. We like that challenge. We like the vines to be challenged rather than everything being given to them.
Carl, I pulled up a quick picture here of your property. At least this is where your tasting room is, with some of the vineyard in the background. One thing I want to note is like when you're around Paso, you see a lot of these little stacked stone walls. As Carl was saying, when they go through a vineyard, you're pulling up a bunch of rock, and eventually it finds its way into some decorative uses, of course.
But then we all have like truck size piles of them in the back of the vineyard that haven't been used yet. That's for sure. that previous photo and this one as well just gives hopefully give everybody a bit of perspective, and that's the one I like to use. Is our vineyard starts at about 900 feet elevation above sea level, but goes up to 1,400 feet in elevation. These are not flat lands. These are hilly and valley. You know, lots of hills and valleys. You can see from that photograph. That's from the top of my vineyard looking out across towards the San Lucia Highlands. You know, there might be some level spots, but it's very undulating, and each one of those provides unique growing conditions, even within a small vineyard like ours.
And then the next slide, I think we have, obviously this was taken probably right near harvest on a different year, not this year. But we get a little closer to some of the grapes, and you can see down on the bottom, I guess, there's some of that rock.
Yeah, that's why I included that photograph, so you could see if you look under the base of the vines, you can just see that cobble, and if you got down deep in it, you'd see maybe small amounts of clay. This is up at the top. There's even a better picture. You know, that's the stuff we're growing in right there. It's most of that's been fractured by us preparing the land to plant, but it's just layers and layers of these millions of years old creatures that have developed this limestone base to the land.
Yeah, and Matt, I've been able to see some of the developments that you've had over time. And I've seen a lot of that rock stuff that you've been ripping out, and you've also created an interesting wall and the like with all that stuff. But
Yeah.
there's got to be some challenges too, and not only planting in this hard rock stuff, but some of the vineyards that you have are really steep. I'll pull up some pictures here, but talk a little bit about those challenges as well.
So some of that soil is actually both. You got more mudstone rock in it. It's actually a really hard, like Adelaide rock stone that is in the substructure there. And then there's pieces that are broken down. Right here, that's Roxy block. Behind there, that's Linne Calodo soil that runs up through that whole front section up that hill there. And then the bottom left corner has a little more humus in it from a stand of oak trees that sits off to the left side there. But as with all vineyard blocks, they have their own little I don't know, little changes throughout every vineyard row. Top right corner of this vineyard has very little vigor. It's super shallow soils. The bottom left corner has a little more vigor in this vineyard. I think growing grapes in Paso Robles is, you have this picture's Trevi Ranch. This is just that was early on, but
Yeah, I've got the before and after on this one.
What's that? You have a before and after? Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Whoa!
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, that's an olive orchard off to the far side there. Those are all dry farmed olive trees that have been planting for just a small production, 100 gallons of oil a year or something, enough to sell a little bit and use around the house. So, but I guess the best part of making wine here is just that there's so many different climates. This property here is at ranges between that back hill there with the two trees on it is 1,350 feet on the top there, and then my other property where the winery's at's down at 1,100 foot elevation. What's amazing is just that 200 foot elevation change, like this vineyard right here. That's 200 feet lower, and that's a cool picture. That's interesting colors. So that's looking towards the west there, looking towards what we call the gap. Looking towards the ocean. The ocean sits 11.3 miles from this vineyard, but amazingly, it also sits 11.3 miles from my other vineyard. If you drew a radial line from the Calcareous pier over by the Pacific Ocean, right there, it's just it's a
I thought I'd
fascinating.
bring this up so we can see where the ocean is compared to like where the properties are that we're talking about.
Yeah, so if you look at Calcareous right there and then drew a line off of that, it's the closest water to my vineyards, or to Paso really. And it works as that big bay right there. The state of California doesn't sit in the bay actually, but right there you have Morro Bay, and that water stays between 60 degrees to about 52 degrees all year round. And what it does is even though we have these warm days here in Paso, it creates a little thermal engine that moves the coastal air back and forth, because you have this hot and cold happening over the earth and then over the water mass there. And it drives the air mass back and forth every day. So we end up with upwards of 40-degree temperature shifts a day. Now, this is all important. We're talking about soil today more so, but the wines, our region was underwater. It was underwater millions and millions of years ago, and with tectonic plates, it's pushed up, it's fractured, it's created all these different locations where you find whale bones and clam shells, oysters, and it's really spectacular when you can grow on all the different soils and just check them out. It's really neat, different character wines, and when you blend them together, you even get something more, I feel. So,
and we're going to get into the wines here in just a minute, but I want to give Jason also the opportunity to talk a little bit about their property, and I'll bring it up right now, Jason. So you shared, I think, 3 pictures with us to help tell a little bit more of the calcareous soil or calcareous.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so as you can see, that this is the hilltop here, and all the vineyards are actually above this. Actually, we just planted a couple years ago down below the tasting room, a small block. But we are not only at calcareous, but we're an intensely hillside a vineyard. I remember one of my first times out here, our ownership is from Iowa, and that's a good shot there. The ownership, I was like, hey, we need a new tractor. It's like, oh yeah, I got a guy here in Iowa that gives me good deals on tractors. Let me send one out to you. And this thing shows up on the bed, and it's got these giant tires on it. And it's great for, it was great for Iowa. I was like, you know, this doesn't work here on these slopes. On the far left there, this is a kind of a story, Milo story of farming. Yeah, far left, that's a Syrah block. And that is what happens. This is a few years ago, we're replanting that now. That's what happens when you have intense calcareous soils and you don't treat the vines right. Even in the foreground, you can kind of see the yellowing in that Syrah block there. Yeah, that's the chlorosis. That's the lack of the ability of the vine to uptake iron and other micrometals, one of the big problems. And that whole band of these, of our hillside there, that's all 9+, almost, there's some sections in there that are 10 pH. And really that far block there is what you see is like, when we first started planting there and figuring out how to grow grapes here, didn't really know what we were doing. And you can see the high death rate. That's why it's so spotty in there. And, you know, we didn't treat the soil right. We didn't promote it right. And it's part of the challenge. It's not just all, hey, these are just beautiful wines with great acid. It's deathly to things out there. I mean, that's, to me, the calcareous soils are this kind of funny thing of one of the secrets of why Paso happened is literally this is terrible, terrible land for agricultural use. I mean, you can't, even grazing, the grass production is so minimal because these soils are so crappy. You know, you can't just naturally like make these big green fields of green grass to grow cattle on. This was kind of agriculturally useless land until grape farmers realized that we could make these incredible wines off of the soil. And so this land was kind of available during this time. It was, you know, to like, you could actually come out here and buy land in California. And because no one else really wanted it, or no one knew what to do with it, you know, until the grape farmers and, you know, more of the high-end West Side who realized that we don't need big yields, we just need to make great wine. And that concept is kind of, you know, this little unsung reason of why Paso happens. These soils kind of made this land available to us, and you know, the early adapters that realized that kind of made this happen.
And I love that you're saying, you know, it's like that these winemakers and these growers kind of made that happen. But I think what else is really important to talk about in making it happen is what happens. Okay, you get great grapes, but there's probably challenges with those grapes when you're bringing them in as well. We talk a little bit about the high acidity that happens, but let's now kind of switch gears and talk about production and some of the challenges and some of the good things that come from this soil for the grapes that you're harvesting and bringing them in. And again, I'd love to start with Carl again, please.
Well, I think, you know, one thing to add on to what Jason was saying that's really important is that, you know, even in the early days, you know, even before my time, people were here trying to grow grapes, and there was just a huge learning curve. And so it became finding the right locations for the right varieties, and more importantly, the right rootstock that was being used that could adapt to the conditions. You know, Jason, I don't know what the rootstock was there, but there's a lot of them I wouldn't put in that calcareous soil ever. And then there's others that could be more adaptive to high pH, high calcium levels. But all of that, you know, we talk about, you know, yeah, you're not going to come out here and grow lettuce or tomatoes or anything like that. These soils are rugged. But they're amazing for wine grapes because we don't want large yields. We want, you know, reasonable yields to make more wines with more character. And so that's why, in many ways, these soils became perfect for growing wine grapes. Is that it kept the vigor in check, because wine grapes can be very vigorous in rich, deep, water holding capacity type soils. So yeah, so that's a great reason why the calcareous and calcareous shale soils, specifically the west side of Paso Robles, are exceptional for wine grapes, and along with all the other things. The fact that those stones hold on to water, those roots can go down through the fissures and clang and hold on to that stone, those little fractured stones down there, and have a water source, even though we may not have much rainwater. And that's why dry farming still can work in the right places here in Paso Robles that have reasonable winter rains, but we don't have to water them all year long. Yeah, if you come to the west side of Paso and you're trying to hang high yields of grapes, it's not quite going to work. We don't even have enough water in the ground to sustain that. But if you're looking for medium to low to medium yields, and you're going to use those wines to make superior wines, it's an amazing place. Did I answer the question, Chris?
But let's get to the challenges once grapes are brought in, and what are the good components that come out of these calcium-rich, high pH soils, and what are some of the challenges when fruit is brought in? And so I'd like to talk about production now.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, for sure. And then the wine that I'm offering up today is a white Rhone blend, but predominantly Rousson, and this is a variety that tends to have elevated pH levels. We have to be really careful that we don't have pH levels too high or it becomes really flabby. Matt talked about some of the temperature differences that help us maintain some of the natural acidity, but these calcium-based soils also allow for more acid in the wines, in the grapes that we harvest. I think the only other thing I would probably add to that, Chris, is that we're in an arid climate, and as we get closer and closer to harvest, the grounds definitely get drier and drier, and so that hang time, that length of time we want to keep the fruit out there, becomes more and more challenging. Thankfully, we have those cooling nights that I think help it. So it's a combination of the soils. I know this is a soil-based conversation, but you got to take all of these things into consideration and the perspective on why the wines of Paso Robles are so special and so unique. So I know if you taste that sidekick that I'm offering up today for you to try, because I really wanted you to try this wine versus a red, because these white Rhone varieties really show that chalky. If you actually pulled that rock out of Chris's water glass and smelled it and tasted, you'd get a bit of that same impression in this wine. Get that chalky, minerally characteristic, and that's a really driving point in lots of the wines. I know the three of our wines, but that's a really big characteristic of the wines of Paso Robles that are grown in these limestone soils.
Yeah, I think what we often hear about from many winemakers and growers is that it does encourage a high amount of natural acidity in our wines. And of course, having those nice cool nights that we have here, it helps to retain that acidity through that big diurnal temperature swing that we have that Matt was talking about, as far as when it gets warm here in Paso and hot air rises, creates this kind of exchange, almost a vacuum effect, and pulling in some of the cool air from the Pacific Ocean, which of course graces a lot of these vineyards in particular. Matt, when we're talking though about this high pH and how it then translates into high acid wines, there's a couple of things though with high pH soils though that kind of allow for that. And I know I've heard you talk a little bit about that in the past. I'd love for you to expand on that.
I actually don't know what we're talking about. I think I end up with really high total acidities and really low pHs on a lot of the grapes that I grow on these calcareous soils, and the reasons for it are probably beyond me, because I'm farming what I get, And a lot of it has to deal with setting up vineyard blocks today for future existence. So looking 10, 30 years down the road of what's going to be available for any additional water. And that's why I'm pushing for dry farming more and more, and actually kind of reverse farming, where I'm cutting off a lot of fruit and dropping upwards, 50 to 70% off the ground, just to keep my vines alive and healthy all the way through. So I think the big challenge with the acid levels in these grapes is that without the ability to irrigate backwards into it to offset the increase in sugar accumulation, that you end up with really, you find yourself waiting on the acid to kind of come up a little bit, the pH to come out from 2.9, 3.0 up to like 3.2 or something, where you get this really still nice bright acidity, but that creates a picking parameter that it's a card that we deal with in farming in Paso for me.
Yeah. And Jason, for you, when you were talking a little bit about that one hillside that was struggling so much, is that the one that you call the hell block? Is that right?
No, that was Devil's Canyon, a little closer. That was the moose block, but the one that's dying. It's this bad boy right here, the moose. Just to kind of piggyback off of what Matt's saying is, what's interesting to me about Paso and learning to make wines on these calcareous soils is a lot of like the book that you read about like sugar going up and acid coming down. The book wasn't written in Paso. The book was written somewhere else. And so a lot of what winemakers here in Paso had to learn, we've had to learn. I guess I'm using the royal we here because this is just, this is how I learned. I learned, early on, frankly, it's the soils and the climate here are so amazing that it's pretty easy to make some fairly good wine. It's just like, you don't have to be whatever. You can the grapes that are grown off this land are just so incredible. It makes up for a lot of mistakes on the cellar side. And luckily, the vineyards that we grow on are so good, it kind of made up for the mistakes I was making as a young winemaker. And frankly, that was kind of what Matt was saying, is like waiting for the pH. Like a lot of the idea about winemaking is like picking on bricks, like picking on the sugar. I learned really quickly, I can't wait for that. I can't trust that because I know those numbers are wrong. I got to really concentrate on pH. And then by waiting for pH, I was waiting, and then like the bricks would get up to like 30 bricks, 32 bricks. And you're just like, well, just because the pH, I waited so long, and the kind of the let it hang idea of just like, there's a lot of more is more in Paso where we don't have the same pitfalls. If you let it hang in some other regions in the world and you get these super ripe fruit and you get the big higher alcohol wines, but your pH is going to be in the 4s and you lose that backbone. And our acidic backbone in Paso is so strong that it kind of makes up. And like a lot of people taste these wines like, this doesn't taste like 15% alcohol. It's because that acid, it's like a mojito. That acid like hides the alcohol so well. And as a young winemaker, I felt that was a little bit of a crutch. And I kind of pushed a lot for ripe and making these big wines because there wasn't like an immediate negativity to it. It's like, yeah, these are big fruity wines. There's a lot of ripeness to it. The tannins are still getting rich and soft. The acid is still there. And then as more and more experience, I started to learn that, well, there's hundreds and hundreds of wineries in Paso. And it's like, how do we differentiate our land, our wine, our place as being something special? And it comes back to the calcareous soil and just embracing that this Lloyd Bordeaux blend that we're showing today is like a 3.45 pH. And that's, for a big tannic Bordeaux blend, it's Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, a lot of Malbec, a little Merlot, Petit Bordeaux. Generally, like having pH that low is going to be like this real like shock and make it hard and make it unpleasant, especially when you're in a tasting room and you're tasting fairly young wines. But the embracing of the acid and the way it kind of cleanses your palate and makes our wines not as like I always say, like the chalky tannin thing, like chalky tannin to me is like really drying tannin, and we don't get that. We have this low pH and we get this juice that comes through that really enlivens the palate, gets the saliva going. And to me, that's the signature of these wines. It's just like I've learned in the last few vintages, starting kind of in 2018 was a real aha moment because it was such a perfect year. There was no stress at all in the vineyards. There was no stress in the cellar. It kind of let me try some of my ideas because it wasn't like the drought years of 15, 16, 17 where I'm just like, let's hope I get some grapes out of this. It let me like kind of experiment more and kind of embrace this idea of like low pH and these big acid wines. There's a beauty to it and there's a typicity to it that is, I feel, pretty special and should be something that Paso really embraces.
Looks like Matt's
going to the food truck. What's going on?
In a refill.
I should have opened these.
Oh my God.
Let's talk, since Matt's going for wine and you're talking about wine, let's talk about wine, shall we? Carl, let's go to you. We are having the Caliza Sidekick, which is 90% Roussanne, 10 Viognier. And like we mentioned before, all of the technical information, of course, is provided in all of the booklets that was sent to everybody, the PDF. But I'd love to get your take on this wine a little bit as to what went into this particular vintage, why the blend, that good stuff.
Well, so on our ranch, we grow two white Rhone varieties. We grow Viognier and Roussanne, and we do a different wine where we feature the Viognier piece, and quite oftentimes we'll do 100% Viognier. But this is the wine where we feature, we started out as this being the wine where we feature the Roussanne piece, and we wanted to go high percentage of Roussanne, but add a little bit of the Viognier for the, the floral aspects of it, and just to give it a little bit of lift, but really showcase the Roussanne, the richness that variety has when grown in these limestone soils. This happens to be a variety that it comes out of dormancy late, and it ripens very late in the season. In fact, we oftentimes pick our Roussanne the same week we're picking the very last of our red wines, which is typically Mourvedre. And they're in pretty close proximity to each other. They're a slightly cooler part of the lower part of the vineyard. But interesting that a white variety gets picked so late into the season. Almost every other red variety is being picked. That may be specific to our vineyard, but I do know in general Roussanne does ripen later. It is a bit of a challenging variety to grow in the limestone soils. You've got to watch a lot of things. You've got to watch the yellowing leaves that Jason talked about, the lime chlorosis. You've got to talk a lot of things make it a difficult variety, in my opinion, to grow. But it can make this beautiful, rich wine that has these lovely characteristics of everything ranging, from pear and stone fruits to honeysuckle and other things like that. And so that's the reason for this wine, to showcase that block in our vineyard. We're all about blending wines, and so we could do 100% Roussanne, but it's always fun to put a little piece of something that you can always make a little better wine, in my opinion, when you blend something to it. Even when we make single varietal wines, we oftentimes blend different clones, different blocks to elevate a wine. So this is just this is our play on the Roussanne piece out of the estate. Everything we do at Caliza is estate driven. So we're really trying to showcase our little 60-acre piece of paradise here in the west side of Paso Robles in these amazing calcium-based soils.
And Carl, the name Sidekick, where does that come from?
Thanks. So most of our wines have something to do with connectivity of people or things, and so we have a wine called Companion, a Cabernet Sauvignon Syrah blend that two wines that are good two varieties that are good companions with each other. I have another wine called Cohort, where we blend 4 or 5 different varieties together. So sidekick is just to play on the fact that Viognier is a good sidekick to Roussanne, or Roussanne's a good sidekick to Viognier. As simple as that.
Yeah, that's great. I do want to encourage everybody if you've got any questions, if you're tasting this and you have questions, throw them in the chat. If not, I know that all of the contact information for our 3 winemakers today has been given to you as well, and you're welcome to reach out to them directly if you have any questions or anything specific to the wines or whatever. Let's go to Matt. Matt, you went over to the Foudre though, but today
Yeah.
we have
Caught me on this one.
I gotta go to something fancy over. Can I go to this?
Yeah. I'm drinking the 2020. Sorry.
we have the 2018 Overthinker, which is 55% Syrah, 38% Grenache, and 7% Mourvedre. Beautiful label too, as well. So I know I'd love to get into label design and everything, but talk a little bit about this wine.
Okay, so in 2005, I planted my first vineyard for Linne Calodo. Prior to that, I had to purchase fruit, and so starting in 2007, from that fruit, I wanted to harvest that original fruit I planted and taste it for the rest of my life. Basically keep a diary of what I'm working on, and that's the original 2007's when the Overthinker was born. Overthinker represents my journey of planting vineyard blocks, training them, learning what sort of techniques work on them, and cataloging it. The wine you have right now is the 2018. So that's now, what is that? That's 14. Is that, how many years is that? I don't know, 11 years since I started, right? So that's the 11th vintage of Overthinker. Thanks, Jason. Hey,
Math is important.
it was not my strong suit, no. But I think with Linne Calodo and wines like these, this is really just a reflection of a region. It's a reflection of working, and we're talking all about soil today, but really, soil, the proximity to the Pacific Ocean, elevation, the people that work on the wines, the cellar that you make the wines in, how you make the wines, all go into the resultant product that you get in your glass. And when I set out to make wine, it was to make wines that represented a region, and wines that were physiologically ripe. And where does that sit? I'm not 100% sure. It's more of a journey that we've been on, looking at it and seeing what happens when you take the seeds and let them get fully mature to where they're viable seeds, not picking them when the seeds are green, taking the plants and really kind of nurturing them, but doing it kind of reverse, from not necessarily adding the water to bring them there, but kind of a lot of hand labor on those vines. These grapes are then picked. It's Grenache, Syrah, and what was my third I had on that one? Was that
Mourvedre.
Mourvedre on that one? Yeah.
7%.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I Jason, are you laughing at me?
No, I'm encouraged.
This is super important to me.
I'm coming next. So
Oh man. Hey, so when I make Overthinker, it's all native fermentations, fermented in concrete. There's a bit of whole cluster, a little bit of whole berry destemmed. It's all piage, so it's punched down, a little bit of pump overs. But I think that and then it's aged in Foudre, obviously. I guess now I'm giving that away. And so I age in Foudre, a little bit of pungent, and it probably has about 20% new wood in there too. But the tannin profile, the Linne Calodo soils that exist in a lot of these blocks that go into this wine really help bring out the cool tannin structure. And when I was a little kid, I was called an overthinker. I couldn't take a standardized test or do math to save my life, apparently. Yeah.
Not a Scantron fan.
No. I would overthink it. It would be, the question would be, Jason leaves for school at $10. He walks to school. He gets
Yeah.
to school and he buys a hot dog for $2. How much money does he have left? $8, $6,
Where's
$4.
the paragraph section on the Scantron, you know? I wanna fill
And
in
I'd
some
be like, I
ideas.
need more information. I figured that he's walked by somewhere and spent some money somewhere else. So,
You definitely are overthinking it. You have other interesting names too. Can you share, before we go into Jason's wine, you have other interesting names of your wines, and I'd love for you to share some of those as well.
I make a white wine called Contrarian, because I used to tell people I would never make a white wine. And then I made one, and it originally was Roussanne and Viognier back in 03. And then today it's Grenache Blanc, Picpoul Blanc, and now I've put Viognier back into the mix because the GBPB in there, the Grenache Blanc and Picpoul Blanc are really acid, almost to the side of lemon rind. And then I make another wine called Problem Child, another one called Outsider, Rising Tide. I have Sticks and Stones, Perfectionist, and then I have I have a slacker brand of wines, which are my alter ego. Those wines are called Poser, Wannabe. I have, what's another one in there? I have Computer Geek, Stereotype.
Classic.
Yeah, plenty.
Yeah.
All right, before we move on to Jason, we did have an interesting question. Carl, thank you already for answering a portion of it. But one of it is, as far as farming on this calcareous type of soils that we have here, what root stocks are the ones that are the go-to, I suppose?
1103.
I'm sorry. say that
1103
again?
Paulson. Everyone loves the Paulson.
Yeah. What?
And then, do either of you have any 140 Regari on your ranch?
No, I have no 140.
No.
I have St. George.
Yeah, so I mean, we have a number of them, but I think we all concur that if I was, well, we're planting 5 more acres. It's all on 1103P because that's what does extremely well in these low vigor, high lime, high calcareous, high calcium based soils. It just hands down is the best for this particular environment.
I'm curious as to how it works as far as dry farming. Is it appropriate for that as well?
Yep.
Yeah,
That works great.
it's the most drought tolerant of the root stocks that are used out here. So it's perfect for dry farming or deficit irrigation for sure.
Mm-hmm. An off question once again, right before we go on to Jason's wine, but how are we seeing dry farming advance in Paso? Are we seeing more and more of it as new vineyards are being planted?
Oh, that's I would hope so, because it's probably the future. When we keep coming into droughts, and the future of farming for me is that we're going to have less and less water, so we need to farm without water. And I like to look at the oak trees. I look at the poison oak. I look at all the natives that are existing in our area and look to see how they're able to perform every year. And they're a great source of a wealth of information to study, to figure out how to make it happen in grapevines also. Now grapevines always seem to overbear their fruit. So it's really kind of working backwards is what I've been experimenting on crop reductions and when to do my crop reductions in order to sustain a crop load. Now that can mean a very low crop load. It's not necessarily the old world of farming of getting multiple tons per acre. It can sometimes end up in anywhere from half ton per acre up to 2 tons per acre, depending on the vigor of the site and the rainfall of the year. So that's
my response is since I've been here, there was the original Calcareous plantings, and then since I've been winemaker, we planted another 12 acres, and I moved it all to head trained and trying, which is more of a low density, spreading it out with wider rows and wider spacing, less vines on the property to try with that idea of the long-term goal of being, and I know, Matt, you've done a lot of head training here. Are you seeing that's using less water or?
Oh yeah. So I've been doing experiments on spacing. So, originally when I came in, the old vines in Paso used to be 12 by 12, the oldest head trained dry farm Zen vineyards in Paso. And they even had some Chenin Blanc out there. But that was really, I think, a spacing issue with the equipment that they had back in the day, where they had their old crawler tractors that were 9 feet wide. And so they spaced them at 12. People weren't buying new tractors in the 30s. And just so they could farm in a narrow gauge. Now, if you were farming prior to that and farming with horses, you were farming really narrow because when you ran a plow behind your horse, you would had to keep going up and down either way, so you might as well plant them at a certain spacing. Today I've been running experiments. I've done 10 by 10, but now I'm doing a lot of 11 by 6 and 10 by 6. And I'm kind of split between the two. It depends on the variety. Movet, I've put 11 by 6 because I end up with a lot of spur breaking. With any you look at it wrong when you're driving by on the tractor, and it breaks a spur position off the vine. On Grenache, I can get away with 10 by 6 really easily. It makes a nice plant. They barely touch each other when they're fully grown. They actually play with each other really well, where they almost the density's devigorating slightly to the next vine over, so you end up with a nice. I'm trying to get about a 1 meter shoot off of everybody right now. So, but that's what I've been doing. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for sharing that part. That's great. Hey, Jason, so I'm assuming you're sipping on that Lloyd there.
I am.
We have Lloyd of Calcareous, also 2018 here. And this is 35% Cabernet Franc, 28% Cabernet Sauvignon, 18 Malbec, 15 Merlot, and the remainder is Petit Verdot.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about this wine, the vintage.
Well,
making this one.
it's named after our founder, Lloyd Mester from Iowa. And even though the Rhones are like a big driving point out here on the west side, Lloyd was a big Bordeaux guy. He wanted Calcareous to be kind of Bordeaux centric. So the original plantings, we have all of these varietals out here. And as I came in as winemaker, I wanted to respect. Lloyd passed away in 2006. And I wanted to respect kind of what his dreams for this property was and why he built it. And part of the magic of Paso is we can grow Bordeaux varietals. And I think in the last 5 years, we've seen this Bordeaux movement kind of hit out here quite aggressively. But with a blend, what's interesting to me is kind of my thought process of how things have developed. And when I go back to what I was previously talking about, like, let it hang, get, push for more ripeness as opposed to embracing the early acidity. Matt, I would say, is one of like my ethos heroes with that general concept of we're not making varietal wines here. We're making wines that speak to our place. And that really should be our goal. The varietal needs to drop down, and the place is what's important. And when you see the label Calcareous or Linne Calodo or Caliza, you should know that you're tasting from that place. And that's what these wines should be expressing over any other thing. And what I learned was with a lot of these varietals and making these blends is when you let it hang, and then you do, like when I was first making wine, I was like, oh man, I'm 30 days on skins. I'm just extracting the hell out of this because I'm gonna make this big over the top wine. It's kind of like a stew, and you start to lose typicity, and everything kind of starts like Syrah's like the chunk of beef in the stew. It all kind of starts tasting like Syrah, and it just blends into there. And you start losing, man, like last week, the farmer's market in San Luis came back, and I was down there, and you were just tasting carrot, and like, my God, that's a carrot, you know, it's not just the bag with a bunny on it, but like that tastes something else, you know, that's like so carroty. And so, you know, that's what you want to grab out of all these different varietals is when you have Cab Franc or Merlot, you want to like go like, man, that tastes like that. And what I have found is by dialing back and a little less time on skins than it used to be, like less macho wines, but a little more finesse, and embracing the acidity, you start to get these blends that really speak to the place. And I've been really happy what's happened in 2018, 2019, 2020. You know, I'm real excited about it as well. You know, all the challenges of that year. This idea of like really embracing the place, really embracing like what makes these things unique, makes the varietal flavors pop. You know, it makes the blend make more sense when the blend is not just like, well, it's all coming together and it's just going to be a beef stew and the carrots and potatoes taste like beef, where you can really start to pick out these little things. And I'm not saying here I nailed it with this blend where like, oh, I can really taste that 4% Petit Verdot there. But that's kind of the goal in these wines. And I think Paso gives us the ability to make wines with that goal, is where it speaks the place, but you can really taste what the blend is doing. You can really taste the individual components and how they're playing together. And I think that's just the next evolution of like how we're progressing in Paso. And I don't know, me for one, just tasting around the last 6 years, I've just been so stoked on like how good the wines are in Paso, and like how much, you know, and it's just, I feel like, and I'm just, you know, speaking for myself again, but I feel I've learned a lot more of how to deal with these extreme diurnal swings, these extreme soils, this extreme place that we make wine in. And, you know, we're writing the book as we go. This is all kind of first generation stuff that we're doing here. And it's really cool. These wines are, you know, pretty, I just really like them, and I want people like whoever, you know, all the people that are watching this today are trying to wrap their minds around. Som's trying to wrap their minds around like, how do I ID a Paso wine? Like if I'm in a blind tasting, like how do I know this is Paso? And I think the really getting behind the acid, really getting behind the ability of these wines to interact with this climate is what's going to make Paso speak, and what will make people be able to blind taste and go, that is a Paso wine.
Awesome. Thanks. I feel like you just actually wrapped it up for me just now, because it's always what we're trying to say as a region when we're talking about our wines is like they're really unique, they're really special, and that you got to taste them, you got to try them, you got to give them the time of day. And I think that is happening more and more. I've been in my position a little while now, and it does seem like more doors are opening up for people to have either a Paso wine on a list, want to include it in some sort of a write-up or a roundup, or even just be a region that is actually featured in one way, shape, form, or another, whether it be at a blog post or a podcast or whatever it might be. And so we feel like we're making a little traction. And to all of you watching, thank you very much for your contributions and helping us along as well. I don't know if we have any questions out there right now, but we promised you that we would be done by 2:45, and we want to make sure that we live up to that. And so I want to, let's see if we have anything coming through, whether it be on the chat or whatever. I'd love to entertain it. And then if not, then we'll probably sign off.
There's no
on.
controversial out there, zingers.
I mean, yeah, you well said, Jason. Well said.
Yeah, I didn't know the philosopher in the group. Get the professor and the philosopher.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a lot of philosophies.
If only all of you watching right now could have witnessed and listened in on the pre-show.
Can you answer this question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm stepping right over you. Can
Oh,
someone?
that's okay. I see it now. Can someone sum up the letting the fruit
yeah, so-
hang in regards to the acids? Go.
This is a good question because I actually wanted to come back to this. So when you eat fruit, like whether it's plums, peaches, citrus, or anything, everyone knows the acid levels. Strawberries even have this, and when you're gardening or taking care of any plants, and you go out to your crop and you're tasting it, there's a point where it becomes really, really delicious. And in winemaking, that goal is to pick the fruit when it's delicious, and it's really hard to pick it when it's not ripe, when it's not there. It's like going out and raising your oranges and pulling them in before they ever get sweet. And for letting the fruit hang, what happens is all fruit comes off with a ton of acidity in there, right? It's both tartaric acid and citric acids that are in there, and as they progress, that acid begins to we say fall out, and it exposes the ripeness of the fruit more and more as you move along. And we've all experienced it. Anybody, do you reduce something, it even does it more for dessert. The place where we want to pick is we let the fruit hang in this chasing of letting the acids develop so that the resultant wine is more palatable and enjoyable. Every region is different for where this occurs, and when you are not irrigating, it occurs at a different point also, because you cannot slow down some of that physiological ripening at times. So those are my 2 cents. Someone else, hop in.
They're kind of inverse. I mean, the sugar levels start out low in fruit, any fruit, and the acid levels start out relatively high. So that you're looking for that acid level drop to a point where it creates where it's palatable. Sometimes it's just crazy tart, and you're looking for that corollary sugar rise, and it's sometimes where those two cross. Sometimes it's the case, not exactly on a graph necessarily, but you've got to get that hang time allows the sugar to develop, and it allows the acids to develop as well. And go ahead, Matt, you got a question?
No. But it's different for every variety. It's different for every grape, and difference between Roussanne and Viognier, and the difference between Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre. In example, the acid level in Grenache is super high unless you take it fairly ripe. Same thing with Zinfandel. The acid levels off the charts, like burn the paint off your car. Right. But when you get to Syrah or Mourvèdre or Tempranillo, has very little acid in it, and tends to fall right out. And it's almost why you can see historically why there's a pairing of Tempranillo, Grenache, or Garnacha, and even Tannat in there, and because they probably paired really well together in history, and they figured it out without any lab tests.
pH meters?
Stuff. So it's really cool. You keep popping up on my screen, Jason.
I'm just fired up for you, man.
You just like you're commandeering the whole thing.
So we're asking for a little clarification real quick. And that is that, so basically what Robin is saying is she picked up through the chat that conditions in Paso allow acids to remain somewhere you want while the fruit hangs. So it's sort of ideal. Is that correct?
I would say so. Like, just kind of, to visit back what Matt said about, like, when you're planting vines and you're looking at poison oak, where you're like, my God, look at that green poison oak stand. How is it doing it? Like, there's a lot to learn about nature, and part of my idea of nature and wine growing is like, well, what's the point here? Look at it from the grapevine's point of view. What are they doing? And to me, what the grapevine is doing is it's producing these grapes, which are going to have a seed in the center of it, and its whole goal is like, well, I'm gonna make something delicious for birds, turkey, or whoever to eat, and then go poop out somewhere else. But I need to have the seed be viable. And so I'm gonna encase this seed in an intense amount of like bitter tannin and high acid, so no one's gonna eat it until it's just right. And then our goal as winemakers is like, well, the things that really make wine interesting as opposed to like peach wine or watermelon wine are those acids, are those tannins that are in there. And that's what gives all these intricacies and all these other different like flavors that come through and all these different like textures to the wine. And so we're playing this little game of like, all right, the grapevine is literally wants to make, at some point, it's gonna make this as delicious as possible. Acid's gonna crash out, tannins are gonna drop down, birds are gonna love it. And like, and our job is to get out there and walk around the vines and try and find that spot where it's like, it's not just straight peach fizz, right, that we're making. We want a little bit, we want this acid, we want those bitter components from the tannin to make this wine and to hit that spot where they're crashing out and the sugar's going up and the deliciousness is going up and the more bitter, interesting flavors are coming together. So to me, that's the challenge of winemaking, is like me watching the birds. It's like, all right, if the birds are really, really fired up about this, I might have missed my point. But see what the grapevine's idea is.
Yeah.
Awesome, Jason. Thank you. I know Carl and
Carl both raised their hands though.
they want to say something, and we have one more question. I want to tell everybody watching, hang on if you want to hear the answer to this next question about diurnal temperature swings. But I do let Matt and Carl get a quick addition.
I agree with everything you said, Jason, but I would more succinctly to Robin's question, the acid level does drop over time, and what hang time does is give us that ability to allow it to get to the ideal point. It doesn't start at one level and end, we pick it at one. That's not what the calcareous limestone soils do. But what they do typically let it not fall out of the grapes, that we are able to retain some acidity. And that loops right into the other question about the diurnal swings. They work together. The fact that we can have warm days, cool nights allows the natural acidity to be retained in that grapes, and therefore into our wine. I don't know about the rest of you, but we don't acidulate any of our wines. We don't add acid. But other wine regions, I won't name them, but other wine regions in California and the world add back tartaric acid to their wines to raise the acid level up somewhat artificially. Paso Robles is amazing because we can retain that natural tartaric and other citrus acid, all the acidity that's in the grapes naturally without having to manipulate it. We're making more, for me, and at least for Caliza, we're making pure wines. We're just using wine grapes and what Mother Nature gives us. So it's a combination of the soil types and those amazing diurnal swings that allow us to hit the ideal point to retain the necessary acidity in the grapes to make wines that have that freshness, that brightness, and couple that with because we had warm days, beautiful, ripe, aromatic, we can extract lots of flavors. They work together in Paso Robles.
Very, very well said, Carl. That's exactly, that's what I was going to say. The only other thing from that diurnal swing is that, like, I have two properties. One's at 1350, one's at 1100 foot elevation, but it sits in a bowl, and the coastal overcast comes in, and it sits over my winery property for an extra 30 minutes to an hour a day. Over the course of a growing season, that can add up into 2 to 3 weeks difference in picking the same grape varieties. And now you look at that as growing season wise. So that means that I come out of the gate a little bit later because I'm a little cooler in the springtime, all the way up till I frosted up to 2 weeks ago. And then also in the fall, I can get nipped by a fall freeze also. So my growing season on the winery property is traditionally about 3 weeks shorter than my growing season on my other properties. I don't, it cuts me off sometimes, but it produces wines that tell a story of that. And that's what's the beauty of making wine. So there you have it.
No.
Very cool. That's great to know. Wow, that's cool. And it goes to show you why the 11 AVAs that we have here are actually so relevant, is because there are these differences that you can go from, say, somewhere in the Willow Creek district. Maybe it's still within the Willow Creek district, but it's still going to be, there's different mesoclimates and then different microclimates. But then you can go over to the Adelaida district and it will be completely different. It will have different diurnal shifts and rain, wind, and all that good stuff that really helps define who we are as a region. I want to thank everybody who hung on for these last questions. Thank you so much. I also want to thank our winemakers, Carl Bowker with Caliza Winery, Matt Trevison, Linne Calodo, and Jason Joyce of Calcareous Vineyard. Cheers, you guys. Appreciate you being on. Yeah, you gotta drink when you cheers. And thank you very much to Tuin Communications who put together for us. Marissa over there at Tuin, along with Melrose, and of course Stephanie Tuin. Thank you very much for putting this together for us, and thank you all. Please, if you have any questions or anything like that, do reach out to us, and also follow us on Facebook, which is at Paso Robles Wine. We do a lot of these types of things actually for the public that are really fun and entertaining. So check that out. Otherwise, go to pasowine.com for any other information. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
Carl, Matt, thank
Cheers,
you.
guys.
Cheers.